Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Shana Tova to everybody, being this is the last class of the Hebrew year. Next Sunday night, the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. As the mystics write, beginning from the Holy Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, and similarly the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi and Tanya, that on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which this year will be Sunday evening, the entire universe goes into a comatose state, anticipating and waiting to be reawakened. And on Rosh Hashanah, a new energy enters into existence, into the cosmos, an energy that is unprecedented, a force that never before existed, and allows us completely new opportunities, different than we've ever had before. So Rosh Hashanah is not just another day in the year. It's not just commemorating events in the past. It's actually a day where something happens. And it's all about how we prepare ourselves and how we create the right containers to receive and absorb this energy. So the way the mystics and the Hasidic masters explain it, think of it like when we wake up in the morning and when we go to sleep. So when a human being is alive, the blessing of life is obviously one that is consistent. By nature, life is something means there's no stop. You don't stop living when you go to sleep. You don't stop living when you change your actions. The difference is only in this level of consciousness and awareness and the state of expressed energy. But life from the moment we're born, or from the moment we're conceived, until the moment when the soul leaves the body, hopefully after 120 years, and not earlier, life is one continuum with fluctuations. Yet at the same time, that doesn't mean that you always feel fully alive. When you're asleep, the expression the Kabbalists use is called kista de chayusa. There's like a remnant of energy there. Think of it like a machine that we use the word, your computer goes to sleep, hibernates. What's going on? It's going into low maintenance, meaning life continues, the heart continues to beat, the mind continues to work, the basic functions and vital organs are all functioning, obviously. But it's on a very low maintenance level. There's not intense energy. Everything slows down. And the mysteries of sleep, which are still being researched, are all about trying to understand how the cells and how the body goes through some type of rejuvenation. Nobody really figured it out. The Medrash says that the soul returns to the well springs of water during the night to refresh itself. Just like we go back to the wellspring to get fresh water. Similarly, the soul gets rejuvenated. But however you explain it, there's no question that sleep is a lower state of consciousness, which is why we're not completely aware of what's going on. Even though, interestingly, we're still responsible for what's going on. It says, Odam mu'ad la'olam, the Talmud says, that a person is responsible even when they do it during their sleep. And the Talmud, of course, using, in its inimitable way, always has examples, that, for example, you're asleep and you, by mistake, move your hand and you break somebody's piece of property, that for whatever reason is lying near you, you're responsible. Because in some ways we do control even what we're doing while we're asleep, and that's why we can set our mind to something before we go to sleep and wake up exactly to that second, or other things of that nature. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we're fully cognizant and fully conscious and everything is just alive as if it is when we wake up. So you could have sleep, therefore, as a good metaphor for a state of a limited, you can say a constricted state of consciousness, which sometimes affects us even while we're awake. Some people sleep with their eyes closed, and some people sleep with their eyes open, which means you could be walking around on earth and still emotionally and intellectually and spiritually be asleep. That's not uncommon. What does that mean? When someone says, I feel like a zombie, or I feel dead, or I feel unmotivated, that's a state of psychological sleep. So the fact that the world continues, the sun rises every morning and sets in the evening, and that the physical world is a dynamic place which is throbbing with energy and throbbing with vitality, that doesn't mean that you are. So the idea is that when it comes before Rosh Hashanah is a way of rejuvenating, not necessarily the physical electricity that's entering into existence. The minimal amount is there. But if you want to have a life that is filled with life, not just walking around biologically alive. God forbid someone medically and biologically would be called alive if their heart is beating and they're a vegetable in the hospital, God forbid. But then there's being alive emotionally, intellectually, spiritually alive, a sense of purpose, a sense of passion that's going to a healthy, harnessed in a healthy direction. That's called true life. And that's what the Jewish people, from the beginning of time, starting from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the day they were created, that was the day of the first Rosh Hashanah. That they gave an accountability, they were accountable, and they gave an accounting of their lives and what the purpose of one's life is. So the real opportunity of Rosh Hashanah, in simple terms, is not just a day of saying whether I was a good person or a bad person, more importantly, a day of reconnecting to your mission in life. The mission that should be causing you to be passionate and living life to its fullest. Unfortunately, we have today a big dichotomy. You ask people what are they most passionate about, it usually has nothing to do with God, Judaism, spirituality. Passion today is actually, as a matter of fact, some people even want to censor the word passion because it's associated with things that are considered by some inappropriate. Sexuality people associate with passion. People associate passion with things that are wild and undisciplined. A passionate soul. The truth is that it's the farthest thing from the truth, because a passionate soul, a soul by definition, a dead entity can't be passionate. So passion comes from the soul. The fact that we replace passion with perhaps destructive or other forces that are occupy our lives, consume our lives, is simply because there's a void. And as I've always mentioned here, when there's a hunger, a deep hunger and thirst, and if you don't find a way to quench that hunger and that thirst and satisfy that hunger, you're going to find other things that are going to drive you to that will satisfy your life. So I would submit that most people become passionate about the things that are most available to them. When you don't know how can one be passionate about God without being a little crazy, and fanatical, or passionate about your soul, then obviously, since a human being needs passion, you have only two choices: either to cut off those juices, not let them express themselves, or they're expressed in places that are not necessarily always going to be very healthy. So basically, we all have outside of our lives this energy, this enormous amount of energy, and we see it from childhood. And the question is where it's going to be channeled, or will it be channeled at all? So Rosh Hashanah, meaning a rejuvenation of existence, or more specifically, a rejuvenation of your existence, really means reconnecting to your purpose. You wake up in the morning excited while you're alive, for some higher purpose. That is essentially what means being truly alive. Just like a business cannot function without a mission statement, a human being cannot function without a personal mission statement. And a personal mission statement can be, I want to be happy, or to build a great, healthy family. That would be the equivalent of saying that a business's mission statement is to make money and create happy employees. Every business should be doing that. A mission statement is unique to the individual. How are you going to use your particular and unique talents and skills that you have and no one else has in a way that will change your little world and the bigger world? That's the question. So Rosh Hashanah is that opportunity. Unfortunately, we're not taught in schools and in synagogues and in our homes that's Rosh Hashanah. Most people who identify with Rosh Hashanah see it more of a day where you're supposed to be trembling before God. Fear. Now is the day of accounting. Are you going to get a new year of life? And the focus is all about life and death, whether you're going to be written in the book of life or not. Because this is the one that's determined. So Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, a lot of people make their superstitious all kinds of stuff that make their deal with God for another year. That's very good for juvenile and nursery school type of level thinking. But on a much far more relevant and significant way, it's really about your mission in life. That's what it's about. It's about, are you truly alive? What makes you excited? Simple as that. If you were to list on a sheet of paper for yourself, no one else has to see it, the top three things that make you feel most excited. What are you most excited about in the coming year? Be surprised what you're going to write down. Some people are going to write, maybe finding a new job. making a lot of money, buying a new home, finding a soulmate. Very few are going to talk about to embrace why I'm here on this earth. Because we don't think like that. We haven't been trained to think like that. We don't even know how to begin thinking like that. But that's what it comes down to. For you to be alive 24/7 in a way that's exciting, it comes down to that you have to feel that you have something to contribute 24/7. How many of us feel that we really have something absolutely important to contribute? We've been trivialized in this world. We've been trivialized even in our homes and families and communities. We've been belittled and demoralized and don't necessarily feel we have much to contribute. Our egos would like to believe we have something important to give. But if you can't answer that question, how excited can you really be about yourself? So you have to find excitement in things that are either superficial or are tangential or that just distract you. That's what we do. Instead of focusing on the real thing. So on a very basic level, I was thinking of writing, just a question of time, I want to write this up because I think the place where everything begins is children. The biggest bang for the buck is if you can teach a child to go on the right path, how much money and aggravation and time will be prevented for them later to have to try to find their lives once they're already adults and already messed up and have to start redigging themselves out of whatever holes they're in. So to me, it would be the biggest. It came to me a few weeks ago. I think I mentioned it here, maybe not. But maybe you hear it here first. It's my latest brainstorm. It's quite simple, actually. I don't think it's such an innovative thing, but unfortunately, we don't do it. How would our children's lives be different, especially as they turn into adults, if every single day, and I mean literally every single morning and evening, and as many times as possible, that the child's parents told the child, "You are a precious soul that was sent to this earth, and let us figure out together what that mission is here for." Even without necessarily even knowing what the mission is, just getting that message from the impressionable years when we're little children, where everything we hear matters to us. Not hear it later as some philosophical idea when I'm already 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, and how do I fit it in now into my busy schedule. A child who has no busy schedule, and their whole future is open for them, to hear this message consistently. I don't think there's a greater thing you can do for your child. Obviously, we're not talking about giving love and confidence and providing for the child all the physical needs. But literally this message, how much more, besides the regular love we tell our children we love, healthy parents definitely demonstrate love to their children, but actually tell them something which it's not even philosophical. For us, it may sound philosophical. It's really all about that you are a precious soul. And I have no doubt that a child hearing that, as they start developing and growing, this will constantly be a message they will constantly remember. So besides the fact that it will prevent other type of experiences to haunt them, you'll have a type of message that they will always remember from youngest of ages, that I'm here for a purpose, and figure out what that purpose is in life. So that's my first suggestion for Rosh Hashanah. And the easiest people to do this is with children, because they don't argue, they don't go into a whole philosophical discussion and say who says there's purpose, who says there's design, who says there's a God. They are very receptive to this concept. And I think it's really, when it comes down to psychologically, it's really telling your child to have total confidence in you, and you have something that you are absolutely unique. And I don't know, I think in our world that today, with all the technology and the depersonalization that we experience, it's probably more important than ever to say this. Because you see, in the old shtetl, when children grew up in a home, they saw their grandfather and grandmother almost every day. They saw a community. They knew everyone. There was no big world out there. So there was a certain message. You know how many people lived in a shtetl already? 1,000 people, maximum. 300 people. The people you knew. You saw them all the time, and you saw the love, and you saw the sharing and so on. I'm sure every community had its own politics, but it was a small world. It was a village, and therefore children were infused with the type of everyone had their role. It was easier to relate to. Today it's a big world out there, and though technology is clearly a gift and a blessing, but also it's a very big depersonalizer. It desensitizes us because you suddenly get a computer. You suddenly see there's 7 billion people. How do we even fathom that number? We don't even know 1 million people. Who's ever seen 1 million people in one shot? It's a number. So we become another statistic. And that's, especially you add into the equation the commercial and marketing-oriented nature of our society, Western society. You don't have that type of focus. So it's true, Judaism provides a Seder and it provides Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and we have all the holidays that are meant to be a time to a time to spend with our children and so on. But I suggest that it's not just about spending time; it's about the message, and the message is, and whether it's Shabbos or Yom Tov or every day and every night, the message is you are absolutely unique, and it doesn't matter how many people there are on this earth. We have to figure out what it is that you and I can accomplish, or you can accomplish. And I have no doubt. I don't think I have to elaborate. It's pretty clear. Some of us have children. It's not, immediately resonates. Today I have to do this with my grandchildren because my children are already older and they already have their own children, so it's harder to do. But I hope I conveyed some of it, at least through example. So that's one just opening statement. But I was going to go a little deeper into the whole discussion of Rosh Hashanah and the New Year, and it came to me lately. In the last few years, there's been a lot of buzz and noise about mapping and the sequence, mapping the human genome. The DNA, and the different ventures here in Europe. They're not only mapping the genetic structure of the human being, the chromosomes and the DNA that shape us all. It's exciting for many reasons, because it's really like slowly figuring out all the building blocks that shape life. As a result, the potential of conquering certain diseases, of discovering how to preempt disease, of how to live longer, how to live better, will be far easier once you see the map. Today we don't have this complete map. We have bits and pieces of it. So I've been teaching, as you know, since Shavuos, the centennial of a magnum opus that began being delivered called Ayin Beis, the year 1912, delivered by the Rebbe Rashab, which means that maybe the most definitive and comprehensive mystical discourse you'll ever find, where he brings it all together, but in a very comprehensive map. He's doing exactly that, mapping the genome, but doing it on the spiritual dimension, not doing it like a medical doctor would or a biologist, but doing it on a spiritual level, because the soul is also made up of pieces and components and parts, and it's actually the soul that shapes. I would suggest submit that the soul is what shapes the genome of the physical genome of the DNA, because what is a dead body without a soul? How would it help us to know our DNA and the sequence of our different genetic makeup if you don't have a force of life that is infusing it all? And this is not just a theoretical exercise, it's actually trying to understand ourselves in the deepest possible way. So I thought that a great project would be, just like they're doing it in France, wherever it is that they're mapping it, to do an equivalent project of mapping the spiritual genome. Now, you probably all know, because you may be familiar with my book on the Omer, counting of the Omer, or in general the concept of the 10 spheres, the concept of the 7 emotions and the 3 intellectual faculties. That the Kabbalah, starting from the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, and then the Zohar, and elaborated by the Arizal, Isaac Luria, actually define the basic building blocks of our conscious lives by 10, divided by 10 building blocks, 3 intellectual faculties and 7 emotional ones. And they are Chachma, Bina, Das, are the 3 intellectual, that every process, the way we function as human beings is a combination of these 10 elements. If you isolate them, they're 10 separate elements. But just like it is with the body, there's no such thing as one cell working on its own. Every cell works with other cells. Every sequence works with other sequences. It's like a computer program. So when you decipher the code, you're really deciphering, but you have to also have the code by pieces. First you know the pieces, then you see how they interact. So what are the so-called abstract building blocks, the archetypes? So name them, they're 10. They're Chachma, Bina, and Das, which is 3 in the cognitive conscious level. I've emphasized conscious because there's a whole other state called unconscious, which I shall soon address as well. And that is essentially every process, any idea that comes to us as human beings, always begins with chachma, with a spark. It's a type of point. Think of it mathematically, it's point, line, plane. Everything begins with a point. A line is the shortest distance between 2 points, and a plane is a combination of many lines that have width and length. And if it's three-dimensional, also depth. So basically, a point. Everything begins with a point. You have an idea, a spark. Most of those ideas will dissipate before they develop and fleshed out. We don't even know how many ideas we have that we don't even remember. They come to us all over, from any time and given time. For some reason, some people think they come from the shower head because many ideas fall into you when you're in the shower. Whatever the reason is. But after Chochmah comes Bina. Bina is considered to be like a river. A wide river. So Chochmah is the spark, the wellspring, from where the water begins to flow, like just the drop. Bina fleshes it out and turns it into a wide, expansive development. There are people who we call a Chacham, another person would be called a Maven. A Chacham is someone who's a great innovator, but usually not great actually at fleshing it out. A Chacham would be a person who has more vision, comes up with a concept. And a Maven, a Bina, is a person who may not come up with great concepts, or doesn't come up with concepts at all, but give them something and they can run with it, and they do develop it into an unbelievable plan. And you'll find even on corporate level and business and so on, usually great companies have these two types of people. A person who's extremely good at creativity, creative ideas, sparks. Another person who has the patience and the wherewithal to develop it. And one without the other, frankly, cannot really function in this world. And it's not a question of which is better or greater. They both are necessary. And they each have their qualities. I'm not going to go through every detail right now, but I'm just laying it out in general. And number 3 is Das. So Das is a little more complicated. Das is the so-called conclusion of an idea. So you could have a spark, you develop it, and then you come to aha moment, a type of conclusion. Sometimes Das is called Hargosha. You feel it. You feel the idea. You sense it's right. It resonates. So you can have a great idea. You can even develop it. And still something is missing. Then there comes a point where you really get it. It really enters into you. It's intimate. Which is why Das is also the word used in the Torah for sexuality, for love. It says, and Adam knew Eve. Knew means that they were intimate with each other. Because Das is intimate knowledge. It's not just knowing something. It's not just understanding something. It's not just conceiving and comprehending. It's knowing it with your guts. Then after the intellect comes 7 emotional conscious emotional faculties, and they are briefly in Hebrew Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. What are they? In English, Chesed is love. Love. Now, I know it's an overused word. What does love mean? For all practical purposes, let's say love here means giving. Type of giving. Love compared sometimes to water. Water bestows. It flows. The antithesis to love is gvura, which is withholding. So if chesed is water, gvura is fire. Okay. 2 critical forces in our lives, not just physically, but also we'll talk archetypally. Another archetype where water expands, fire contracts. So fire in the context of Gvura, in this case, is discipline, withholding meaning, channeling, measuring. What's the word I want to use this? It's tempering the flow of love. Love that doesn't have Gvura can be destructive. And of course, Gvura, discipline, withholding that doesn't have love, it can be equally destructive, even maybe more destructive. I mean, in human life, you find people who are very giving and loving, they don't know when to stop. It's like the gas without the brakes. And Gvura is the brakes, is the disciplines, the channeling. Like raindrops are a perfect example of Chesed and Gvura working together. Rain, water, it's Chesed. It's the blessing of water that makes things grow. But if it would come down in buckets, it would flood the fields. So it comes down, Gvura is Geshamim, it comes down raindrops. So it's water, but it's coming down in a tempered way and measured that the earth can absorb it. a teacher, anyone that loves someone knows that besides giving love, you have to know how to give it. That the person who you're giving it to can contain it. Some people are excellent at giving love, but they absolutely do not consider the person they're giving it to. So they flood and they can drown out that person, and love can be destructive. Then comes Tiferes. Tiferes, you'll see everything is in threes as well. So you have like right, left, center. If Chachma is like the right brain, Bina is the left brain. Chachma is the spark. Everything's connected there. The right brain. The left brain is where it breaks it down into details. And then Das is that sense of resonance and completion. The consummation of an idea. So that's the middle path, the balance. Then comes the same thing in emotions. Chesed would be right, and Gvura would be left. And Tiferes is again the middle path. What's Tiferes is compared to compassion, Rachmanis, Rachamim. Tiferes is sometimes called beauty. Beauty always is harmony within diversity. It's not about one color blue or one color red. It's not just about fire and water. It's about the perfect symmetry between the two. And together you have Tiferes. In emotions, it's usually compassion. Again, if you've read the book, the Omer book that I did for the 49 days between Passover and Shavuos, these are laid out there in detail if you want to look it up later. Then comes the fourth emotion is called Netzach. Netzach is literally means victory, but Netzach is endurance, ambition. So it's that driving force. It's again right. It's the right force. It's similar to Chesed, but Chesed is love, and here it's a driving force to succeed, to overcome obstacles, the persistence that's necessary. Its counterforce, again, its so-called alter ego, is on the left, just like Chesed has Gvura, the brakes of Gvura to the gas of Chesed. So Haid is humility, yielding, drive, blind ambition, and aggressive and persistent drive also has to have a measure, or else it can step over and run over everybody around it. Haid is humility. It means acknowledgement. It means to yield, as opposed to just drive. It's a form of humility. And then comes the third there too. The middle is Yesod. Yesod literally means foundation. Yesod is bonding. So it's bonding. It's in some ways it's a combination of determination and humility, but it has its own personality, just like Tiferes does, and that is the element of bonding emotionally. You can love someone, you can have discipline in the love, you can have compassion, and you can have endurance and humility and yielding, but you may not be bonding with that person. Bonding has an eternal element to it. It's like a absolute commitment. So like Das is very similar to Yesod. In the intellect, what's Das? It's not just you conceive of an idea and you understand it, but you connect it. You become intimate with it. It's like you become one with it. So the same thing here. Tiferes does that to Chesed and Gvura, and Yesod does that to Netzach and Haid. That it's a type of bonding emotionally with another, or with something that you are connected with, that has what we call Yesod. It's a foundation. We say a binyan adayad, for example, in marriage, an eternal edifice. And then finally, the seventh and the 10th of all these 10, and the seventh in the emotions is Malchus. Malchus literally means kingship. It means majesty. But in emotions, it's essentially a sense of dignity. And it has its own particular personality. Again, I'm not going into extreme detail here. I just wanted to lay it out, because you're talking about mapping the genome, you're talking about Rosh Hashanah, the creation of the human being. So who are we? What are we made up of? What are our building blocks? And it's sometimes just good to know that it's not as vague as one may think. It's actually broken down. 10 building blocks. Straightforward. And these are, everything you do in life is a combination of these 10, one way or another. As I said, they're not 10 isolated. Just like someone said to you, are you some of your parts between your arms and your legs, your eyes and ears? You say, no, I'm one entity that has millions of different pieces and they all work together. But to understand them, you have to break them into parts. You go to a doctor, You can't just say, I have a pain. You have to identify where and isolate it. Because the fact is, even though one healthy entity is really one, a symmetry, and basically you can say it's a harmony within diversity of our entire beings, but are made up of pieces. There are parts. Except that the entirety of the parts is more than the sum of the parts. There's some captain, there's some unifying force that unites all the parts within ourselves, as it is also in nature. So really, to really understand ourselves, we really need to know both elements. One is the pieces, and the other thing is what connects them all, what makes them speak to each other. And that's far more complicated. Nobody has ever really understood that. Even medically, I've asked many, many doctors, and all types of doctors. Well, we have today doctors. We have doctors of philosophy, and we have doctors of psychology, and we have doctors of medical doctors. We have in the social sciences, and the physical sciences, and political sciences, there are PhDs everywhere. The kid that comes to Rosh Hashanah, he sees that the synagogue hired a new rabbi. And he sees his name is not just Rabbi, he's Rabbi Doctor, whatever, Rabbi Dr. Epstein. So he calls up the rabbi and says, "I welcome you to the community. I am happy to hear, and I have a headache. And what can you do for me? Here we can have it. Kill two birds with one stone. What does he need? A doctor and a rabbi. Here he has a rabbi. That's a doctor." So the rabbi starts smiling and says to him, "There are different types of doctors. I'm not that type of doctor." He says, "What kind of doctor are you?" He says, "I'm a doctor of philosophy." So he says to him, "What illness is that?" So the bottom line is that we have, as I said, a structure that goes back not just 5 years or 100 years, it goes back thousands of years. That's actually a structure of what makes us tick. Who are we? So what better time to discuss it than the eve of Rosh Hashanah, when we celebrate the collective birthday of the human race and the birthday of each of us as individuals. As the Mishnah says, each of us was created as an individual, exactly like Adam and Eve, in order to know that we carry responsibility for the entire world. We were not created as a cluster, in a group. Each of us is an individual. What I mentioned before, the message we should be telling our children literally every second of the day, is you are unique. Not to give them a big ego, but to give them the responsibility, the value, the dignity to know that you must find out what your soul's mission is, and that's the key driving force of your entire life. So the Mishnah says that, more or less, in Sanhedrin, where it says, "Lefichach nivra adam yechidi," what that was on Rosh Hashanah. That's why a human being was created as an individual, not as a group, but as an individual, to teach us that every one of us is unique, as if no one else exists in this world. And that doesn't mean, again, not that we should treat everybody as if they don't exist. That's not what it's meant. It meant that we should understand that what we have to contribute, you can't look around and say, "Hey, someone else is going to do it if I don't do it." No one can do what you have to do. That story with talk about the Olympics, the Jewish Olympics rowing team. So before the training for the Olympics, they keep losing all the, whatever they call them, the heats. So the Jewish team says, "Listen, why don't you go over and sneak into the clubhouse, into the locker room of the Harvard team, they keep winning, and find out what those goyim are doing, What are we doing wrong here?" Okay. So the Jewish guy sneaks in there, and he comes back, he says, "It's brilliant what they're doing. 10 people on the rowing team," he says, 9 people are rowing and one person yells. To finalize that, to give you the punchline if you haven't guessed it. Because by the Jews, 9 people are yelling and one person is rowing. So obviously you're not going to win the race that way. So sometimes, we're all generals. There's no one left to be a soldier. Similar story they tell about, significance. This poor town receives the great news that the great king of the entire kingdom is coming to visit them. This is a very rare opportunity, and they wanted to show appreciation. But what can they give the king a gift that would be valued? So they realized, they can't really give him. He doesn't have anything. They don't have anything he doesn't have. But the gesture would be, everyone, he knows that when we're a port town, if everybody brings a cup of wine and pours it into a big barrel, we'll give him the barrel of wine. He'll see the little gesture. Because for us, if everyone bringing our small little wine, that would be significant. They put a big barrel up in the middle of the town, and that was the decision. Everyone's going to pour some wine. Now, of course, there's a bunch of smart Jews here, like the rowing team. So they said, you know what? Hey, there's 1,000 people living here. Who cares? I'm going to go spend my wine. That wine is very valuable. I can use it for kiddush for all year round. I'll pour water into the barrel. What's going to be 1 cup of water compared to hundreds of cups of wine? But obviously, everybody in town was equally smart. So they ended up giving the king a big barrel of water. I mean, it all comes down to how significant we feel. And that's what the Rosh Hashanah message is, that you and everything you do matters now and forever. Nobody can accomplish what you have to do. So begin rowing and stop yelling at others to row. Or saying, it's not for me, someone else will do it, it's a bigger job, whatever it is. That is that vote of confidence that God gives us every day, and Rosh Hashanah in a global sense. The vote of confidence, you can do something no one else but you. But to help us get there, it would be very useful to understand what makes us tick. And what is it what forces work with, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? Know thyself is the first step to actualizing yourself. So someone say, okay, I'm ready to row. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. But what do I have? What are my faculties? What are my skills? So that's why you have in Primus Torah, in the inner dimension of Torah, actual breakdown, a map of the genome, of what makes you tick, what strengths you have. And you can actually identify, are you more chachma, more bina, more das? Are you more chesed, gvura, teferes? Now we all have all 10, let's make that clear. But some of them are naturally stronger and some were naturally weaker in. That's a given. No one is strong in all 10 equally. Then there's many of them we may be very strong in, but no one ever helped us cultivate it. We don't even know we have strength there. Sometimes, someone berates you or doesn't let you actualize something. You start thinking, maybe I'm not really strong in that area. Then the person that does believe in you, you realize you're actually quite strong in an area that you never even realized you're strong in. So it's not a simple matter. It's not just a question of first we have to understand these levels, first to be able to see, where do I fit? Then the next question is, so where do I stand in each of these? How am I with chesed and gvura and teferes? And guaranteed, if you use this as a map, firstly, you'll understand yourself in a new way completely. So it's no longer just, look at yourself in the mirror with all your subjective blind spots and coming up with an image of yourself. Did you ever listen to yourself on tape? Record your voice? Anybody likes their voice when they hear a recording of it? No. Nobody likes it. Actors and actresses, actually when they interview them, tell them for their coaches, for years, force them to listen to themselves. Because it makes you get better. And they still don't necessarily like it, but they learn the method. Why don't we like how we sound? I tell you the truth, sometimes I know people listen to my classes and they listen on YouTube or on audio. Then sometimes I hear myself, I cringe. I said, why would anyone listen to this? This guy sounds like whatever. I really do not like it, but I just simply ignore it, and that's that. And when people tell me it's great, I say, okay, I'm happy to hear it, And trust me, it's not like I lack confidence. It's not the problem. The problem is really you just don't like your voice, whatever reason. But that's the voice everybody hears. The one you don't like, everybody hears. The one you hear is not what anyone hears. You don't hear yourself, How do you like that? How many other things about us? Imagine if we really knew about ourselves everything that other people see. I don't think there's anything we perceive correctly. Everything we perceive from a distorted view from within. I'm not saying it's not important. Of course, you want to, you feel good about yourself. It doesn't matter whether other people feel good about you. But the bottom line is, how many other things don't we really see? That's why juxtaposing your life to these spheres, to the building blocks, and understanding them gives you some type of objective backdrop, so you could say, okay, where do I stand? Do I conceive better, or do I flesh out ideas better? Or neither of the two, which is also an option. Doesn't mean you can't, it means you just don't, And then the same thing is with chesed and gvura. So I don't want to turn it into some type of, the pseudo, pop psychological quiz or test, because life is much more complicated, and I actually am always very, cynical about these tests online, do these things. But the truth is, some of them are very well done, and they are scientific. Just important to always qualify. Nothing is conclusive. How much can one test do? But some of them do have a lot of wisdom, have been developed The worst ones are the ones that feed into, obviously, our astrological, childish the superstitions. But the ones that are sophisticated are the ones that challenge. And the ones that challenge make you really look at where do you stand with chesed, where do you stand with gvura. So this isn't about getting a definitive, I don't believe the way to approach this is that you want to come away with a definitive personality type. Now you can hang it up on your refrigerator. This is my type, 4721, whatever it is, these numbers or letters and so on. Because to me, that usually does not lead to responsibility. It just leads to making you feel good about yourself. And in Judaism, the focus is always motivation to grow, not whether you're going to have, I got myself figured out. We don't have ourselves figured out. Because with all this self-knowledge, all you need is one curveball. And suddenly you realize, hey, 1 second, I don't have it all figured out. Because if you have it all figured out, next time, God forbid, we all suffer setbacks. God forbid, we all suffer losses. Suddenly all these personality types are not going to help you deal with someone rejecting you. Let's put it this way. You're going to go say, I'm this type, that type. My point that I'm trying to make here is that self-awareness is critical for growth. Not about trying to just satisfy our that human craving for the exotic and the unknown. Like the same reason why people want to know what reincarnation they came from, or even interpreting dreams. So there's plenty in Kabbalah and mysticism that talk about dreams, and even talk about palm reading, and talk about face reading, and talk about many previous lives. But you'll never find a bona fide, a true Kabbalist talk about it. You go to the greatest true Kabbalists, they'll always dismiss it. They believe like they don't know anything. And the ones that they say, the ones that know don't say, and the ones that say don't know. That's a pretty strong rule. Why? Because they're not interested in impressing you, especially for some money, to show you their previous lives. And above all, it's about responsibility. If you need to know, God will let you know what previous life. And as one Rebbe once told somebody about interpreting dreams, he says, first let's figure out what to do when we're awake before we get to our dreams. I'm not trying to dismiss it, but it is a certain tendency for people it's almost like an escape and a crutch, an excuse or whatever it is. And the goal is responsibility. The goal is to be a mature adult, look at your life, figure it out. But at the same time, there's plenty to be learned about what personality types and where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are. And I didn't even get into the unconscious. Talking about mapping the genome and Ayin Beis, the real exciting part of it is when he gets to the unconscious. Because the conscious, as I said, is at least it's something we can tangibly touch. You could pretty much quickly determine whether you're more chachma or more bina. It's not that difficult to do. Just look at how you come up with ideas. Look at what your strengths are. Same thing with chesed and gvura, and the same thing with other emotions. Where it gets more complicated is when you start going to the areas that it's harder to identify. The things that are beneath the surface. Because that's where the real engine room takes place in the genome, which is what shapes chachma and what shapes bina. So for all these 10 faculties that I just mentioned, there's equivalent, there's a counterpart. There's the unconscious chachma, there's the unconscious bina, there's the unconscious das. They all have a second dimension that's behind the curtain. And that is already, that requires a lot more training. But the first step is to understand what's on this side of the curtain, and then we travel inward. So the real training is to try to teach a person first how do you define how you see somebody, and then you can start saying, okay, what are the causes? Now, if you think that's overwhelming, the plot thickens. There's behind every unconscious there's an unconscious, and if you ask me how many layers there are, it's pretty many layers. And there are people, human beings on this earth, not many, that can go very deep on unconscious. But you can't go there first if you don't go to the lower levels. And above all, the interesting thing when it comes to these ideas, you can't travel purely by curiosity. You have to pay a price if you want to go into those worlds. When Moses said to God, I want to see your face, God says to him, no man can see my face and live. And then God continues and says, I will show you my back. And then adds, but my face you will not see. There's long explanations on what this dialogue, what that meant. But in very simple English, and you can even take the word God out of the picture, it's not even a religious thing. You want to know the truth. Can you see the truth and be you? Or most of us really need, as Churchill said, in the time of war, the truth is so precious, you have to surround it with an army of lies. Can we really deal with naked, raw truth about ourselves without any filters? Can anyone live without filters? Not that simple. Those people that tried to, using William Blake's line, cleanse the doors of perception, got themselves into deep trouble. They couldn't come back. They burned out there. Because it's not that simple to see things without filters. Just like you can't look at the sun without a filter. Can you look at yourself without a filter? It sounds like it's very exciting. I'd love to be able to say, yeah, I'm ready for the truth. But we're subjective creatures. Can we handle it? Can a person handle someone telling you exactly what you really are like, through and through? Do you have the strength for that? Now, I know most people will say, of course, yeah, they have to rise to the challenge. But if you're an honest person, and I start with myself, not that simple. They tell the story about this guy, his entire life he was looking for the truth. And he traveled from one place to the next. Years passed. He became an older man. And he never found what he was looking for. The last years of his life, he's already now in his 70s, he meets an old sage and shares with him what his life goal, which is to find the ultimate truth. The sage looks at him and says to him, how much of a price are you willing to pay for this truth? Didn't mean financially. So he said, what do you mean? My whole life I've been searching. Not a small matter. It's not just my whole life. This has been my biggest goal. I've never stopped. Anyway, he gave him the benefit of the doubt. So he said to him, if you travel to here and here, gave him directions to go to a certain distant land, you'll come to a place, gave him exact details, in a big forest you'll find a palace. That's called the House of Truth. You'll find your truth there. So he embarks on this journey. To make a long story short, I'm not going to elaborate all the steps of the journey. If certain stories are good, if you need more time, you can just embellish. So he ends up, he sees this palace, like strange, in the middle of nowhere. As he opens up the doors, he notices a fascinating sight. As far as he can see, he sees these long halls, and they're filled with only one thing: light. Candles, flames are burning everywhere, each in its place, rows and rows and rows of flames. And observing this awesome sight, a fellow suddenly comes over to him and says to him, "Can I help you? I'm the gatekeeper here. I'm the housekeeper." "What is this?" He said. "This is called the house, Eilam HaEmes, the world of truth. This is the house of truth." He says, "What are all these flames?" He says, "These flames, every person on earth has a corresponding flame here. And when you study that flame, you see the truth of that person's life. You'll see flames of different shapes and different colors, and you'll see flames that are destructive, and you'll see flames that are very refined. You'll see tall flames and short flames. You'll see new flames. Those are newborn children. They're just beginning. It's a lot of fuel. We don't know where it's going to go yet. And you'll see flames about to burn out. These are the flames of souls that are about to leave this earth." So of course this man says, "And where could I find my flame? I've been looking for this my entire life." He says, "Well, go down row, whatever it is, row A, column 27. Anyway, he goes and finds his flame. As he gets closer, he's like really tentative, because this is like it. As he gets close, he notices it. He's like shocked. His flame is about to burn out. So he realized, this is the end of the line. And then he understood why he's been allowed to come here, because this is it. But he gets so disturbed by his flame being burned out, he looks around to see if anybody's watching, and he takes another flame, the oil, and pours it into his own cup to give himself a little more time. As he's finishing doing it, he feels piercing eyes staring at him. The housekeeper is looking, saying, "And you were ready to pay any price for the truth, right?" So what the story is, the moral is, the push comes to shove, we all have our interests. And not that simple to see truth the way it is. And actually the best teachers and mentors you'll ever find are the people not that they tell you everything. As a matter of fact, the expression is they reveal 1 inch and conceal 2. They will tell you what you need to know right now. And the day will come one day when you understand other things that they may have told you didn't understand at the time. Because it's not about impressing someone with knowledge. It's not like a crystal ball will tell you your future. That's not how it works. The greatest Leaders and teachers are people who will tell you what you need to know to give you the tools, the methodology, that whatever you'll face, and the day will come, the seeds are planted, the day will come when that seed will sprout when it needs to sprout. That's what true conveying, because it's not about self. The problem is always the self. It all begins with our interest. Now, I'm not suggesting we should not have any self-interest. And we are all created with a certain sense of self that is divine. God created us with a sense of self. But the self that becomes exaggerated, when we don't like our voices, is because we don't really know our voice. That's why. We don't like to hear certain things. It's about, the self is when you begin self-worship, when the self becomes the defining arbiter and defining factor. That's where the problems begin. The self blinds us. It's biased, it's subjective. There's a need for that too. That's how we preserve ourselves. That's how we protect ourselves. But it's not how we find truth. The self is not your way of finding truth. Your way of finding truth is to get the self out of the way. And that's where the challenge becomes. And that's why any type of tainted agenda, where you want to see God's face, because why? Because you want to feel like you saw the reality, because you feel better that you were shown the truth, that's not good enough. And God is basically saying, you want to see me, you have to stop looking. By not looking, you'll see me. That's the ultimate secret to all real things in life. That's how you find love. That's how you find truth. That's how you find God. That's how you find your soul. You see, we live in an acquisition-oriented society. It's about acquiring. You want something, you get the money and go buy it. Real things cannot be purchased. They can't be acquired. They have to emerge, and emergence is always through a process. Nothing real, and someone can show me, give me one example of something that's real, that comes without a process and can be acquired without emerging. It doesn't work that way. It emerges. Even in technology today, all the technologies, you ask physicists and scientists, they'll tell you energy is there everywhere. The tools we're using is not to force the energy out, it's the opposite. It's to create a subtle form of environment where the energy will emerge and feel comfortable to emerge. Not that it has a will or knowledge, but it's about creating. It's not about we own energy. We don't own energy. It's the mystery. It's the humility of realizing that there are mysterious forces out there, and you create the right tools and the right instruments and the right vehicles to harness those forces. That's the real understanding of what it's all about. But the ego is always the trap. So in understanding these, the genome I'm talking about, Chokhmah, the 10 faculties, and understanding the inner dimensions is direct commensurate. And here's maybe I gave you the good news. The good news is that there's a structure. The good news that it's all mapped out. I don't call this bad news, but some may see it as bad news. The other news is that to get in there, you have to pay a price. And the price is not money. The price is to give up what you worship so much, and that's yourself. To be able to see the unconscious, you cannot enter with your conscious faculties. You yourself have to take yourself so seriously. Because if you go in with your tools, that's what you're going to get, your tools. This is the key to all knowledge. And is the hardest thing to come by, because it means you have to give something up to get that. And we don't want that. We want to have the best of both worlds. There's the classic example that, who was it? Sir Arthur, forgot his last name. Eddington, maybe. He's one of the physicists, philosophers. And he was asked by some, how are you coming up with these new quantum mechanics, quantum conclusions that are so counterintuitive and illogical? Things are in an indeterministic state, probability, uncertainty, wave and particle, the observer affects what it observes, everything that was counter to any type of understanding of logical science. That there's cause and effect, causality. And here, in quantum mechanics, there's no causality. You can't define things in that way. Without going into all the details. We never even saw an atom, let alone a subatomic particle. How do you come to such conclusions? And this is not about faith, we just believe it. And he gave the classic analogy, which is an excellent analogy for almost anything in life. He gave the analogy of a fisherman who spread his net across all the seas. and then collected and gathered all the different types of fish and began documenting different colors, species, shapes, the works, families, fish. And he came up with a whole list, and finally he started looking for some conclusions. What does he find? What do his findings lead to? And one of his great conclusions was, which he was going to announce to the whole, the wizards of the world, whatever you call them, the Nobel Prize, I don't know. And that was that there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. That was his brilliant conclusion. He's about, he's reading his notes and so on, and he tells it to his little child, to his little son. He says, that's what I discovered, there's no fish in the sea. Now, a little child doesn't need all the science to understand there's something wrong here, because he's seen fish that are smaller than a half-inch long. So he asks his father, what kind of net did you use? Yeah, he looks at the net. The net has spaces of a half-inch. He didn't even think about that part. So the net has the spaces of a half-inch. So obviously all fish that were shorter than a half-inch fell back into the water. So was his conclusion true or not true? Yes, it was true, with one condition, with one qualification. That when using a net with half-inch spaces, you'll never catch fish that are half-inch shorter. But you don't need him for that. You didn't need to catch any fish for that matter to find that out. So we come times with conclusions, and conclusions are correct. The problem is, what tools did you use to get to that conclusion? So someone will say, okay, define what is real. Well, that's a very simple question, sounds like, right? Not so simple. What is real? It depends. If you talk about sensory tools, what is real is what I see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. But that basically rules out anything called like ideas, concepts, and love. And for that matter, microwave energy and ultraviolet energy and anything else you can't relate to with your five senses. There's no way you can see it. Some things are impossible to see. So the answer then, okay, so let's not use our sensory tools. What else? What other tools do we have? Okay, supersensory tools. Because that supersensory, fine. Intelligence fits in there. I can't see intelligence. I can't touch it, but I can sense it in some way. Some other way. I have another tool. Same with love. So do we stop there? Answer obviously, one second, but that's also limited tools. Who says, the question is, where do you stop? The answer is you stop where you want to stop. The truth is there's no place to stop. If you're ready to shed your net of half-inch and then shed other nets and other tools, the sky's the limit and beyond. You can reach into the infinite itself. And that's where what Chassidus calls the concept of bittul. Bittul means shedding your perspective. That's what it means. Shedding your layer. Suspending your way of looking at something. Because as soon as you put your way of looking, that is the trap. So you could argue, one second, so what else should I do if I don't use my way? What way should I use? Someone else's? No. It means not being trapped in what you think are the conclusions or what you want to conclude and so on. Meaning open to hearing anything. And often that means that you may not like what you hear. Or you may hear things that compel you and obligate you to do things you don't want to hear. So it's a journey. I wouldn't suggest that you can just begin immediately. It's step by step by step. The first step, and I'm now going back to Ayin Beis and mapping the genome, the first step is to get a handle on the conscious existence. Even our conscious existence we're pretty much blinded to. Forget about unconscious. I know that sounds like a shock to many people. What do you mean? I'm conscious, I understand I'm blind to. But conscious, I got my act figured out. Really? As I said, without understanding yourself in the 10 spheres that I just mentioned, you don't have your act figured out. You don't even know what you're strong and what you're weak at. I would say most of us are not even thinking about our true faculties. Most of us are spending the day busy trying to make ends meet, and we already have obligations, and we're already traveling 90 miles an hour, and that's what we're doing, is maintaining our speed, maintaining our so-called, the realities we think are so important to us. So there you go. There's your first net that you have to challenge. Who says what you think are priorities are priorities? You ready to ask yourself that question? Now, I'm not here to tell you have to ask yourself. You can choose not to. But there's a price for everything. If you choose not to, then you've written your script. then your reality is what you've defined. And that's that. And if someone will say to you, maybe these priorities are not really priorities, you'll say, I know they are, and that's that. As soon as you do that, you've closed your door. Now, some people don't mind that. They'll say, I feel comfortable with that. I don't need to know more. If a person comes to that type of statement, they come to that, there's really not much one can say. Most intelligent people won't say that, even though they actually feel that. They'll say, no, of course, I'm open to any type of possibilities. But they don't live that way. They just talk the talk. So this really comes down to our own personal integrity. Rosh Hashanah is around the corner. Rosh Hashanah opens up new opportunities. For most of us, we want new opportunities. When? When our old opportunities aren't working. But if they're working, why do we need anything new? It's working fine for me. True people of growth don't think like that, as you can imagine. A guy like Moshe Rabbeinu was not satisfied with his great achievements because he's looking for the truth. He's not looking for his comfort zone. Most of us are looking to be comfortable. That is a very big driving force in our lives. And everyone deserves to be comfortable. Don't trust me, I'm not suggesting otherwise. But comfortable means also status quo, if that's where your comfort is. When God says to Moses, you cannot see me and live, he told him the ultimate secret. And that, by the way, ended up allowing Moses to see God. That secret is that there is something greater than you in the picture. And when you commit yourself to that, then there's no limit to how far you can reach. So we all want excellence. So you're going to ask someone, you want to be mediocre? Or you want to be good? Or you want to be excellent? Why? You want to be mediocre? Huh? No, understand. Now, some people want to be excellent at being mediocre. Excellent mediocrity. There's also that. They've mastered the art. Einstein, mediocre is far from a compliment. But what do we define as excellent? What does excellent mean? Excellent means that everybody thinks that we're the best. Does excellent mean that you're making the most amount of money than anyone else you know? What does excellent mean? Even a question like that is so hard to answer. Because if you really start analyzing it, you'll find out your definition of excellence is based on a bunch of programming. Someone programmed you to think what's important, what's not important. What does excellent mean? Some people say excellence is being a noble person, to be a giving person. I wouldn't argue with that. But how do you even define it? This goes back to what I said earlier, why I think the biggest preemptive thing we can do is get our children straightened out. Because you think straight from the beginning, it's much easier to work with that. Whereas right now you come to someone and say, okay, let's review what excellent is. First of all, it usually frightens off people. It's too big of a question, and don't go, that's like too much for me. Secondly, even if you want to enter that dialogue, how much time do we have? Right now I have the floor here, so I'm going to talk. But after this evening, you all go back home, and tomorrow's another day, and the next day is another day. We have our lives to live. You think that we change, even if we hear something that resonates, that sounds good? We go back we gravitate back. The Talmud, the Medrash says an interesting statement. It says, "Zrek chutra lavira ikrakoi." You throw a rod up into the air. I'm talking about, let's say, a stick that has a heavier side and a lighter side. It's always going to land on its head. The gravitational pull, you will always go back to your routines. To get someone out of a routine requires more energy than the inertia of a routine. Think of that. So think about that. If you made a formula, what is my routine? You need a force not equal to that. You need a force that's more powerful than a routine that you've been doing for years. That's a lot of energy. And most of us don't have the time and willpower to invest such energy. That's why it's so hard to break an addiction. Because you're not just talking about the addiction, you're talking about an addiction now has its own life. It's just the way you do things. And then, so your mind is already adjusted to it, your heart is adjusted, your whole body's like the neurons, as they say, as they get fired, that's how they get wired. Your whole neurons have been now wired to accommodate a habit and a routine you've been doing for so long. Which is why, I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but he brings in Tanya. That brilliant statement from the Talmud that says, what is Avodah? Avodah Elokim. It says to serve God. What does it mean to serve? So the Talmud gives an example. Someone who studied something in the Torah 100 times is considered as if they did not serve God. If they go 101, more than one more time, that's considered Ovid, serving. The question is, what's taken 100 times is quite a lot. What is that 1 over 100? What does that do? And the answer is because in the time of the Talmud, the custom was, the routine was to study something 100 times. It was by habit. To do something by habit is not called serving. It's called just following, it's called mechanical. Automatic pilot. That 101 time, that one time more, because it's not their routine, that changes everything. That means even good routines tend to have that type of inertia, that type of gravitational pull. So to enter into our own genome, into our own thing, this is the difference between the medical version and the spiritual version. There, the only effort that has to be done is the painstaking work of mapping the genome. Here, your ego makes a big difference, how you're entering. And that's why in Rosh Hashanah we blow shofar. And Yom Kippur we fast. Because it's not just, you can't enter the unconscious world of our souls if you don't do something about it. You can't just enter because you're curious. Or because you're a tourist. And you're interested in like sightseeing and seeing what it's like. You have to enter with your guts, with your whole you. And to do so, to earn the way, there's things you have to put on the side. You have to allow yourself to be open to hearing another perspective. A shofar is an interesting thing, if you think about it. When I was a little younger, so I don't know if I was more skeptical than I am today, but I had my own share of skepticism. And I used to wonder about this blowing of the shofar, I used to wonder because it was like, I stepped back sometimes in the shul, and my father always was aggravated by this, even though he was very open-minded and encouraged and never dogmatic, but he didn't like my challenging certain times in Rosh Hashanah when it's supposed to be a moment of awe. And I once asked him, I said, what's going on here? There's thousands of people listening to the ram's horn. Like, if you think about it as an outsider, like, I understand the tradition, and I'm not challenging the Torah says it's a mitzvah, but I was just like, in my so-called secular mode, trying to understand as an outsider what exactly is going on here. I understand we want to have a conversation heart to heart. Rosh Hashanah is a great time. Let's all get together and talk from our soul to soul. Talk to God. Talk to each other. But what's this thing blowing a ram's horn? You got a ram's out there, America, New York, who's ever even seen a ram? Suddenly we have a horn that they carved out, and people are blowing it with a blessing. I say this I'm not trying to be irreverent, because of course there's also very beautiful and very many lessons in it. It was just my way of challenging and trying to really understand. I wasn't trying to be the wicked son at the Seder. The Rosh Hashanah doesn't have a wicked son, but you get the idea. And then, of course, the same question I had was, it comes Sukkot. You come in, if I was an outsider, I walk in, I suddenly see thousands of people with these 4 vegetables, and waving them, and this, and like, what's going on? Like, what is this? One thing that looks like a lemon, called the citron esrog. Another is like a branch of a palm, the lulav, and then there's the myrtle branches and the willow branches. It's odd. Again, it's a mitzvah, and I'm not taking away. But what does this mean? And I always had a difficulty. So for me, I gravitated to the spiritual side of it, thinking the spiritual. Okay, there I understand. Everything in this material world has a spiritual counterpart. The shofar has spiritual meaning. The physical part is the shofar. The spiritual is the sound, reflective of the sound of the soul. There's different sounds of the soul. Perfectly fine. But I came to something as I got older, something far more simplistic. The spiritual part, as I said, fine. I came to something that was very interesting. This was my little epiphany. And that was that there's actually something powerful. Exactly, my question was exactly the point. If everybody got together in shul and started talking heart to heart, which is also questionable if Jews could get through that, and not gravitate to other type of conversations, but that's another story. I would not be asking this question. It was precisely that here's a ram's horn out of the blue forcing you to get out of your comfort zone, and suddenly, in a completely different paradigm, a different framework. It's like excellent. I was reading a few years ago some type of advertising firm in the West Coast. They're very known for that. I forgot their name. I'm sure you could find it. They're known for their creative campaigns for companies and really put a lot of products on the map. And interesting what they did. They take their creative minds, the best minds and writers, copywriters and idea people. It's an advertising firm here. As materialistic as it gets. And they schlepped them to some Colorado retreat, literally, where they turned a farm, they turned a piece of land into an amusement park. Completely like children. Sand lots, merry-go-rounds, completely ridiculous. And they're like, they almost have to regress back to their 6-year-old. And there's a lot of ice cream and cotton candy. And that's where they spend all day. And then at the end of the day, they have not at the end of the day, they have every few hours, they have these breakout sessions, and they brainstorm ideas for this product, of new marketing ideas. They want to schlep them completely out of their comfort zone, basically. Completely different environment. And forcing good minds, creative minds, to become even more creative, because they usually won't think this way when they're in their corporate offices in Los Angeles or wherever they are. And I said to myself, that's brilliant. That's exactly the point. If someone got up and gave a great sermon in Rosh Hashanah, that's nice. But here you have the holiest man, in my case, the Rabbi would blow the shofar himself, standing with a ram's horn, a ram that you never see, and emitting a sound is the simplest, some call it the most, the purest sound instrument. Just a sound, a hollowed ram's horn, and emitting this haunting sound. That forces you to get out of your way of thinking. And suddenly you think about a completely different way of looking at things. What is a ram, its purpose, and stuff like that. I'm not even talking now about the spiritual side of it. So I realized that a big part of Judaism is exactly the thing that alienates so many secular people because it doesn't seem relevant to us, has the benefit, because it's exactly the point. If it's relevant to you, it's not going to get you anywhere. The point is to challenge that part of ourselves, that so-called, what's the word I want to use? That logical, rational part of ourselves, to do something that's not so logical and rational. And this is in addition to the spirituality. Spirituality is profound and tremendous. But here it comes down to physical mitzvahs. You could also meditate on a lulav and an esrog and a ravis and hadassim. Or meditate on a ram's horn. No, here you take actual physical horn and the works and so on. What I'm saying is because in Jewish thought, to enter into the inner structure of your being requires not just wisdom of understanding Chachma and Bina and the conscious and the unconscious and all the levels that I've described and many more, but it's also to get you out of your way of thinking. And there's only one way to do it. You have to surrender, in a way, to a different approach. You have to be ready to look at something not the way you're doing it. And this you do not find in other mystical traditions. The absolute rigid commitment to mitzvahs, the details of it. The thing that is so counterintuitive to a spiritual person, which is focused on details. Who really cares if you turn on a switch on Shabbos or not? Or you carry a quarter in your pocket? How can that be significant on a spiritual level? Or whether you'll find a crumb of bread on Passover and spend weeks ahead of time to look for every stupid little crumb wherever it may be. That is exactly what is completely challenging to a rational, intelligent, there's a word I'm looking for, not humane, what I will call normal way of thinking. Now, if there was no spirituality behind it all, then that's another story altogether. That's a matter, then you could say anything. You know what? Get people to do somersaults in the middle of Broadway. They'll also be out of their paradigm and also come up with new ways of looking at things. But if you recognize there's also deep spirituality behind it all, to get to the next door, you need to get out of your comfort zone, out of your paradigm. Then you have the real beautiful combination. So, to sum up, we all have a genome. We all have a structure. We all have Chachma, Bina, Das, all the way through Malchus, as I described. But the difference is between one and the next, between each of us, is the measure, where our strengths are, how strong we are in one area and not another, and how they interact with each other. Because obviously it gets far more complicated once you start mixing Chachma, Bina, Das, and they're all working together. Then it's not just 10 isolated elements. But you have to begin with the isolated and analyze that. And then comes, in Ayin Beis, after he finishes discussing the so-called immanent faculties, the conscious faculties, then comes a whole discussion now, what we call the transcendent faculties. Transcendence. Transcendence is really going to a place that's a little beyond what we can consciously experience. So, there are people, for example, how good would you rate yourself at reading a face, a human face? Someone walks into the room, some people really pick up a mood immediately, and some people don't. You don't have to announce your feeling. Think about what I'm saying, okay? What is it why does one person have that intuition and another does not? And can we be trained? Can you become more perceptive than you are? It's a good question. Or, you are who you are. Whatever you're born with, that's what you got. Some of us have instincts, some don't. The answer to all this is absolutely can be trained. Because it's no question, some people naturally just have either what we call emotional intelligence or common sense or able to see things. They sense. Very, very sensitive people. As a matter of fact, some people grew up in very unhealthy homes are very high sensitized state where their antennae are up and they immediately sense when there's tension or something more than others do. They're much more sensitive to that. But there's all kinds of different factors at work. But I'm going to focus right now is really how one becomes more sensitive. And the answer is when you become less self-oriented. The more you're not focused on yourself, the more you sense what's going on around you. Now, does that sound brilliant? It's not brilliant at all. It's very simple. But we don't do that because we don't want to give up on the self. So we rely on, whatever I figure out. I'm not ready to do more than that. But your sensitivity to realities around you are direct proportion to how much of you is in the picture. And the less there is, the more you will pick up. So, in the context of the awareness, as I said, the 10 spheres and so on and so forth, the key thing to really understand is that when you meet somebody, someone comes to you, let's take a scenario, it could be yourself even. You have issues, and you share those issues with somebody you trust, tell them here and here the situation, what do you suggest I do? It could be area of relationships that are not working or not working well. It could be an area of work. It could be you're stuck in your life altogether, not going anywhere. It could be whatever the list is, you can fill in the blanks. Everybody's got their stuff, So what's the method? If we were to document the method, what do you do? What do you do next? How does someone who's a good mentor, someone that's educated, someone who understands the soul, what tools do they use to help you give you advice? Is it just they have some type of revelation? God tells them what to say? Obviously it's not that black and white. I'm sure God has what to say to them, but it's also what they bring to the table. So it really comes down to what a person like that is who's trained, in a way sees you or sees your situation. They don't see the symptoms that you're describing. They immediately are able to see the causes. They can't always see every cause, but they see some of the causes. They're able to, or if they don't see it, they know at least that's what I have to look for. So they know where to look. No different than a doctor. You tell a doctor I have a little pain in my shoulder, and a lay person will not know what to say. A pain, okay, fine, take a painkiller. But if it's a persistent pain, a doctor, I just heard somebody had a problem with their shoulder, they told me. They went to all kinds of doctors, then finally someone said, go to this and that. Yeah. Within 3 minutes, the guy diagnosed it, but other doctors have been still not even sure. He has that training. He just has it. He has the experience and training. He's able to identify. He has it down pat. Obviously, no one's perfect, but the idea is, what is he seeing that others don't see? His years of training, his experience, his understanding of the anatomy, I guess, and all the elements, and I've seen enough to be able to isolate immediately that if you're doing this, it's definitely not this problem, and so on. How many mistakes we've made, and we've learned from our mistakes. Someone else comes and tells you, I did this and this, you say, definitely don't go there. You know what not to do. Sometimes you know what to do. So it's a combination of intelligence, it's a combination of knowledge, and above all, experience. And maybe more above that even is sensitivity to look for those causes. Now, how deep can one go? So someone who's trained is able to see not just the Chochmah Bina Das, which that's the easier part, because that's conscious. They're able to see the unconscious. And the way they enter there is because they're able to not look with their perspective, they're able to shed their perspective and just look at the situation for what it is. This is very difficult to do with yourself, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, because we're too subjective. Even if we were right now were to sit down and say, you know what, I would like everybody to answer, take the 10 spheres, the 10 faculties, and Chachma, rate your Chachma from 1 to 10, your Bina from 1 to 10, your Das, your Chesed, your Gvur, all the way, all the 10. How would you rate it? Guaranteed you're not going to rate it accurately. What you rate is going to be very valuable for two reasons. First of all, because you will say something, obviously, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Right? So you're going to say some things that are very important because you know yourself to some extent. For example, Chochmah Bina, you'll know I'm pretty good at innovating, I'm not so good at fleshing it out. And the second thing that's important is to see your blind spots, to see how off you are. That's also valuable, to see how far you are really from what an objective person would say. So right there, you immediately have the beginning process. But what the truly trained eye, and truly traveling into the genome that I'm discussing, is to really understand the forces that are beneath the surface. Because let's say you even determine, you know what, you're very good at chesed, but not good at gevura. You're good at giving, but not know when to withhold, how to discipline yourself. Or the other way around, too much discipline, and you don't know how to give. Fine, that's a diagnosis, so to speak, but that's not necessarily a cause. That's just a fact. That, as I said, is relatively easy to do once you get beyond subjectivity. What's difficult to do is why. Why is that the case? Is it that your genes are just more chesedic than gvuridic? It's like you're just born with that? Is it hereditary? Or maybe it's connected to some experiences in your life. Maybe you've learned from those around you, from your parents or others, that you don't just give so easily. Or the other way around. Is stinginess genetic, or is it something, or is it acquired? My good friend Elie Wiesel tells me that he thinks it's neither genetic nor acquired. He thinks it's just a disease. That's another discussion. A disease would mean that it's acquired, obviously, but it's worse than acquired. It's an illness. So the point is that as you look at each of these items in one's life, you can go in and look into some of the unconscious forces. And then, of course, the big question is intervention. What do you suggest? What do you do? And the Jewish approach is a combination of behavioral and called therapeutic psychology. Behavioral means, yes, the Torah does expect you to do something, to say thank you and please, even if you're not in the mood. You don't have to go to 10, 20 years of psychotherapy to be taught to say please or thank you. Just do it. That's a mitzvah to do it, and that's it. It's a menschliche thing to do. Simultaneously, you want to work on why you find it difficult, do that. And the same thing with many other things. Judaism does expect a certain behavioral response. At the same time, Judaism is not superficial to say just behavioral. Obviously, you also want to get into the soul level of what drives a person, what defines a person. But to necessarily have to go and regress to our childhood and find out every little cause of every behavior of our lives is not healthy necessarily, and not necessary. Only if you have no choice. So it's a combination of behavioral change, acting a certain way, which in itself has an impact on us, and also accessing some of those deeper forces. And for each of the spheres, each of the faculties, Chochmah, Bina, Das, there are corresponding exercises. There are corresponding mitzvahs. There's a book called Sefer Charedim, where he documents how every organ and every faculty corresponds, certain mitzvahs correspond to that faculty. So just like we take certain vitamins and certain what other words, nutrients, and other there's vitamins, nutrients, To complement or to supplement or to strengthen different parts of the body. The same thing, different mitzvahs strengthen different parts of your soul. So chesed, for example, the mitzvah of charity is a chesed oriented. That's an easy one. You're exercising, just like a physical therapist would teach you to exercise certain parts of your body in order to compensate or to build up strength. There's exercising your heart. Like the guy who needed a heart transplant, they asked him, whose heart do you want? He says, the wealthy guy on the top floor of the hospital. They said, why? He says, because he's never used it. He wants a new heart, basically. Obviously, it's a joke, because actually a used heart is much better than a new heart. You want a heart that knows how to do chesed, that is trained in loving, not one that never loved before. But the same thing is with each faculty. There are exercises that are mind-oriented, cognitive. There are those that are emotional-oriented and those that are action-oriented. Each one there's mitzvahs connected to Netzach, to Hayd, Yesod, and so on. So you have, in Judaism, you have a comprehensive map that, number one, maps out each of us that was created on Rosh Hashanah, each piece, each component, and you can identify your strengths and weaknesses. Number two, it helps you enter into the unconscious, which is the forces that are beneath the surface, that are not visible to the eye. And to help define how you get there and how you can open the channels of the unconscious to stream into the conscious, which I shall discuss in the next class. Here I was focusing more on the conscious. And you can actually create new channels of energy. Just like when you exercise a muscle, what happens? The muscle gets more tuned, gets more conditioned. It allows the blood flow. It allows more energy to enter your body. It's simple as that. God forbid atrophy, or when a muscle or any other part of the body is not being used well, the flow of energy doesn't flow through it as well. It's exactly the same thing on a spiritual and psychological level. When you exercise those parts of your being, your psyche, that are weaker, new energy flows into it. It's as simple as that. And you can absolutely open up channels. First of all, from the source of the conscious to the conscious, and secondly, from the unconscious to the source of the conscious. So essentially, think of it like a type of multi-layered process. The outer level is what you see, the naked eye sees. Then begin the conscious map. Then there's the unconscious map and the unconscious. And you go all the way into the inner dimensions. And you can create a channel from the most inner dimension all the way through. So as he says in Ayin Beis around the Rosh Hashanah discourse, he says on Rosh Hashanah, when the contract is renewed, a channel of energy opens all the way from the source, through all the layers of our unconscious, all the way to the conscious. That's what's renewed. So like in the morning when we wake up, after a night of sleep is a certain type of comatose state. Everything is subdued. When you wake up, there's a new force, a new surge of energy. It's like the source is now transmitting a new flow. So Rosh Hashanah collectively, this new flow begins for each of us. And therefore we have opportunities that we don't have any other time of the year. The first opportunity is to connect to that. The flow's open. The flow opens, and as you create more containers for it by exercising the parts that need to be exercised, you create actually containers that draw down and that transmit. It's like, think of it like a drained battery. An example I'm using because my battery drained today and I needed a new one. So I'm using my personal life as a let's call it a laboratory, guinea pig, kosher guinea pig. So drain battery. So what happens is as the battery drains, so instead of, let's say, it's at 100% strength, it's only giving you 5%. So you're getting a juice that is only 5% level. Now, with batteries, it doesn't really work that way. It's not like 5%, you're only getting 5%, it's 5% is left, and then it's dead. But you don't get less reception because the battery is weaker, right? But there are examples where you can say when there's less juice flowing, you actually will get less reception. The same is true in our lives. The channels of energy that enter our lives are in many ways impeded or blocked due to our behaviors, due to our own ghosts and skeletons, When we ask for forgiveness, for example, before Yom Kippur, it's not just a nice thing to do. It is a nice thing to do as well. But it's also freeing yourself up from the weight of carrying the guilt or hurting somebody or someone hurting you. Freeing yourself up creates a flow of energy. Simple as that. The things that block us are the things that haunt us. How much of your mind is consumed with something someone told you yesterday, or 20 years ago for that matter. You can't get it out of your head. These things, besides that they disturb you, they also occupy very valuable real estate. That nothing else can go in that particular area because it's consumed. You've given it away to whoever is holding you hostage with that experience. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is a time to give that up. Like Kol Nidre, we give away all our vows and our commitments and the things that bind us. Because the first thing you need is space. You can't bring in new energy if your space is filled up. So, being that we do have to ultimately prepare for Rosh Hashanah, right? I will conclude the following note. That a good exercise, or several exercises to do before now Rosh Hashanah, is about how you prepare. You set your mind to opening yourself up to new opportunities. Number one is you have to free yourself up of things that are filling your life, things that are weighing you down. You have a whole 200, 300 pounds on your back. It's going to be very difficult to lift up an extra anything. So you got to free yourself. That's number one. Number two, you have to realize that you have enormous potential and energy waiting to be released. Rosh Hashanah can come and go, and will bring in a whole new surge, a new flow. But if you're not capable of receiving it, it won't enter your life. It'll pass through. You may have some inspiration. You may not. Let's say even you do. The question is how long it lasts. Is because if you go into Rosh Hashanah the same person, and you carry all that weight that you had a day before, how do you expect new energy to enter into you the day after Rosh Hashanah? You're still the same guy or girl, whatever you want to call it, the same person, the same human being. So it's like you can go, someone can bring you into a new palace and give you all kinds of new opportunities, but you're not new. You're going to leave there and you're going to go back to where you started. So you went through, you had a nice vacation, you had a nice experience. So it's critical to do something new in your own life, or else it won't be able to manifest. It won't, let's put it this way, it won't be sustainable. So that's what we have to find, things like that. And then number three, yes, it would be very good to begin to analyze our own inner genome. What are we made of? And interestingly, Rosh Hashanah begins a process, as you all know, called the 10 days of Tshuva. So that number 10 is not an accident. Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur are 10 days. It's called Binyan HaMalchus. That's when we build the Malchus, the dignity of the 10 spheres. Each day corresponds to one of those spheres. Chochmah, Bina, Das. Matter of fact, in the 60 days, the book 60 days, which is available here, in the 10 days of the 10 days of Tshuva, starting Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur is the 10th day of Tishrei, right? The 10th day, the holiest day, it talks about the exercises for each of these 10. So you have an opportunity to use each one of those 10 days as an introspection to that particular dimension, and identifying and determining where do you stand, examining where do you stand, your Chochmah, your Bina, your Das. So that's a good beginning. And then the continuing classes that I'll be giving next week, the next few weeks. Next week, there's no class, correct? 1 second. Rosh Hashanah no, there is a class. Will be a class. Why not? Yeah. There'll be a class. The following week is not, because it's Yom Kippur. The next week will be a class. Yeah, Monday, Tuesday is Rosh Hashanah, so it's Wednesday night, yeah. There will be a class. So I will continue the discussion and try to move a little from the conscious to the unconscious. But I expect that you will also move there, because it's going to be hard to talk about something if you're still where we are here. But the journey continues, let's put it this way. So I plan to use this as a recurring, I can't say every week, but a recurring theme of mapping the spiritual genome of each of our psyches. and slowly identifying the different components and what we can do to strengthen each part. But it's definitely a fascinating journey, and hopefully does excite at least some of you, to get to know yourself. Maybe it's time to finally get to know yourself in a real way. And with that, I want to wish everybody a very blessed year. A year where we have both, number one, success in every part of our lives, materially and spiritually, all in good health, and blessings of love, and those need blessings of relationships, and finding your soulmate, finally, may be blessed with that, and those that have the soulmates to know how to hold on to it in a healthy way, and build healthy families, all with, as I said, health and parnasa, which is abundant livelihood, and with the wisdom to know how to use it well as well, and everything else that your heart desires, and including the things that you may not even know what you need, but God knows. He should give you that as well. And we should all be blessed in a very healthy year, a year of life, and a year of soul, of expressing ourselves and finding the reason why we're here. And God should be good to everybody. Philip's class will be taking place tomorrow night, and again, 60 days is available. Many people find it as a good tool to help travel through this 60-day journey, the high holidays, and it's a blessing to be able to be here with you another year as the year comes to a conclusion. It's always important to acknowledge the gifts that we can continue on, and hopefully all of you can be teachers in your own right, the sphere of influence, the people that you have impact on. And the more you take upon yourself in these good activities, the more God is obligated to bless you to be able to fulfill those commitments. So everyone have a very good Shana Tova. If any way I could be of help with Meaningful Life Center for the high holidays, if anybody needs any assistance in any way, please let me know. And if anyone of you needs special prayers for any particular reason, I'd be happy to take it down, any names or particular requests. You can write it down in a note to me, or you can send me an email, or any way you feel comfortable. And it's an honor to continue the journey with you. Thank you very much.